I can't see you. That's okay. Welcome. We're just waiting for to see if a few more people join us. We don't usually have a big cavalcade of people. When I've done this in the past, so we don't often have a lot of people joining us, but we'll just wait and see that it's right on 11 o'clock. We have a few more people turn up. So I'm guessing we have a Richard, is that right? Maybe you could just, if you don't want to turn your camera on, just give me a thumbs up. If that's it, right? And I'm sorry, I can't guess who Ryan is. Hey, Richard. Good to have you here. Sorry, and I'm not even going to try to guess who Ryan 155 is. Oh, can't hear Ola.
Ran 155. Would you like to rename your username so we can?
Or you can just come on, or you just, even if you don't turn on your camera, just let me know what your name is so that I.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Masood Rana. I think CSR they put Ran 155.
That's right. Was it Marshall? Sorry, was that right?
Yeah, M-A-S-U-D, Masood.
Masood. Welcome, Masood.
Yeah.
Thank you. You don't have to have your camera on. I just thought, oh, it's nice rather than talking to a number on a screen, you know, your name. Welcome. I'll just give it a couple more minutes. There's always that weird thing because everybody's on completely different time zones, right? So even this morning I was having to organize delivery of something and they're from Victoria and it's like, so if you get, they said, if you get the notice and it says it's coming at 4 o'clock, it's not 4 o'clock, it's actually 3 o'clock because we're in Melbourne, you're in Queensland. And but if we have international people as well, that's even more confusing. I was once completely late for a job interview, which was in Melbourne, and I was in Queensland. And I, you know, it was at 2 o'clock or something. And I, you know, called up at 2 o'clock and of course, had to be at my, whatever, 1 o'clock. So it's ridiculous in one country that we have all these different time zones. Well, given that I'm going to be a good behavioural scientist, which means I'm going to reward. I'm not actually a behaviourist, but, you know, I'm going to do that today. Masood and Richard, did you have any questions or things that you wanted to ask about me or about the course?
No, at this moment, no.
Nothing that's coming to mind?
Nothing, you know.
Hi, Nishrat. We can see your fingertips, so we know you're there. It's good. Welcome. As I said, we don't usually get big numbers attending, but I'm aware that it's recorded, so people will watch it afterwards. And also, this is, you didn't tell people, this is the wrap-up video for this week. Is that right, Orla? In terms of, we usually use this as the wrap-up video because It's not usually much more for me to say by the end of this week. So thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking part in the course. Does anybody have any comments or questions about anything so far? Stuff that's been harder or stuff that's been useful or less useful?
I'm just impressed with discussions this time. Yeah,
people have really been getting into the discussions this time, haven't they? I mean, they always do, but I feel like people have engaged a lot more with those this time than I've had in the past, which has been nice. People, sharing and also responding to the polls, which has been good. It's always hard when I'm wrapping up and I'm telling the polls if we've only had like 10 people or 6 people reply or something to say, oh, this is the main response, when maybe only 3 people said it as opposed to 1. So, well, if people don't have questions, what I often do for this video, in case it's of any interest to people, when I was just chatting with Ola about, is I talk about my experience of having been an HTR student, which I think I alluded to. I talked about a little bit in my welcoming video that I have been a PhD student twice in my life. and not because I'm a super brainy person who has 2 PhDs, but because the first one didn't work out for me. And I sometimes share that story because it can be, particularly in academia, you kind of only hear the inspirational stories of the people who did the straight line, right? Who kind of went through and they got in and they got their PhD and then they moved up the ranks to professor in academia. And I think sometimes it can be important to know that there's a whole bunch of other people who did things a little bit differently. So just in case it's helpful, I can tell my story. I'm pretty open book too. I'm always welcome people to ask me questions. And if you don't feel comfortable asking questions here online in front of other people to understand, I'm always really happy for people to contact me at a later stage to ask questions about either stuff about the course or stuff that I'm talking about in terms of my own personal, sometimes rocky journey through academia. So I'm a psychologist. So I did my first 4 years in psychology. You have to even get on the path to be able to call yourself a psychologist, which is a registered health professional term in Australia. So that means that even if you study a psychology degree, not everybody gets to call themselves a psychologist, which is very tricky. So if you even want to have a hope of becoming a psychologist with the title psychologist, you have to do at the very minimum a 4-year degree. So that's a 3-year bachelor degree. And then you have to apply to do an honours degree, which not everybody gets into. But so I did my first 4 years at one Queensland university. And at the end of that, I said, I hate psychology and I hate academia and I'm leaving the country and I'm traveling and I'm never coming back. So I went overseas and I traveled, did a lot of backpacking and worked as a research assistant. And then after 3 years decided that I did want to take things further. I'd settled down a bit, calmed down a bit. So I came back. I think I wanted to do clinical psychology or something that was sort of more applied. But I did love the research side of things. I always loved that kind of inquiry, I guess, just being exposed to new ideas and the richness of knowledge. So I came back and I enrolled at that time in what's called a clinical PhD, which in psychology means you do a combined postgraduate clinical training with a PhD, with a full PhD. It's not a course that's offered pretty much anywhere anymore because it's really hard and people don't often finish it, but some people do. So I applied in this combined course, and then lots of things happened. I ended up just really struggling. It was the first time that particular university, it was different from the first university I've been at, it's a different university. First time that university had run this program, so they didn't really know what they were doing at that time. And it just wasn't working for me. So and stuff happened with the supervision. After 2 years, I said, I'm not sure if I can do this. So I took a year off and was working a bit. And then I decided I would come back, but I came back part-time to the PhD with a new supervisor and a brand new topic and started on that. And it just wasn't working. I was really not in a great space emotionally and mentally, and it just felt like pushing big boulders uphill. But because I came from a background where it's not really acceptable to not finish what you start, I kept slogging on. And I also came from a belief system that I felt like if I dropped out, what did that say about me? Like, did it say that I wasn't smart enough or I wasn't good enough or I should be able to do this, or people were telling me you're smart, you're going to love university, and I just wasn't, and I was too frightened to reach out for any help at that time, so I just kept going. And in the end I thought, this isn't working, maybe I will make myself do the confirmation process, because maybe it's just because that is so awful, which it is, it's really awful, as many of you either been through it or are approaching it would know. It's hard. It feels like your whole something that's very precious to you is kind of being put onto a table for everybody else to dissect. So I thought maybe just because that's really hard that I will, I'll push through and do that, and then I'll make a decision. So that took another 12 months or something to get to that point. And after that, I still was not unhappy. It just wasn't working for me. And then it took another few months for me to actually finally say, I think I need to withdraw from the PhD at this point. So, so I did, and I went on to get my master's qualification without the PhD. So on paper, it looks like I took 7 years to do a degree that would normally take 2 years. But when I look back at that experience, I think about how I really should have listened. I should have got help, I think, earlier, or said that I was struggling, admitted that to myself and to other people, and then I probably should have allowed myself to, well, maybe with help I wouldn't have had to, but if I'd felt the same way, I should maybe have withdrawn a bit earlier rather than putting myself through all that. Anyway, I went to work clinically as a practicing psychologist, and then still got a bit restless in terms of missing that research side of things. And somebody I knew, excuse me, knew of a project that was happening in Norway that had a PhD attached to it. And I had been an exchange student in Norway when I left school, so I had a little bit of contact with the country. So she suggested that I apply for that, and sort of without me knowing how or why, I ended up in Norway doing a PhD for 4 years. So, and whilst I did have the privilege that I was able to write that PhD in English, because at that time they encouraged people to do it because it allowed for international people to examine it, given that not a lot of people in the world speak Norwegian, for Norwegians. I did have to learn the language and function in all sorts of other ways in a non-English speaking country. And as an international student, so I do understand the particular challenges that bring, that you're not only trying to deal with how hard a PhD is and trying to get that done, and it's hard doing a PhD, but I also, had to deal with, I was on my own, so trying to find accommodation on my own, trying to work out how the taxation system worked, trying to work out the different public holidays they had, for example, just trying to work out even how to cook, with different foods available. So all those sorts of things of living in a new country that you're trying to do. And I was, on my own, as many international students are, hand by hand, as trying to work out this PhD that I was doing. And I was on a scholarship. So there's the pressure with the scholarship, as most international students are, right? They're here on some sort of scholarship. So there's the financial pressure of needing to perform and produce things because you're getting paid, and there's a very strict timeline to it. So I do absolutely appreciate the additional challenges that there are on international, and the loneliness that comes from that. And it was tough. So the first few years were very lonely, very tough, and my mental health was not great. In addition to that, I had some major conflictual issues that came up with my supervisor, some stuff there that happened that was not great, to the extent that I needed to revise my supervisory relationship. Because my grant was attached to that supervisor, I needed to keep that supervisor on my team, but in a process that became very messy that I won't go into here, but I'm happy to talk through with other people if they want to hear about that. It ended up that I had to revise all that. So having to do that in a different country, in a different language, right? Negotiate conflict within a supervisory situation when you're in a situation of lesser power was incredibly challenging. And that was about not quite 2.5 years in. And then I went through this process of, do I even want to keep doing this? Or not, or do I want to go and do a lot of work around that, and finally decided, okay, I do want to continue. I do want to try and get this PhD, but things are going to have to change in terms of my mental well-being, in terms of how I take care of it. So I then became much more active in terms of looking after that side of things. And I got some professional help. So I had some professional counselling for the last 12 to 14 months of my PhD. I didn't know very many people, so it was quite lonely. So I decided that I would form my own support group. So one Friday afternoon, it's always on a Friday afternoon, isn't it? I sent this email out to a few other female PhD students that I'd met at conferences and meetings and that kind of thing. In Norway, there was a tradition often of bringing PhD students together a bit more than I think is common, at least at the university I currently work at. Anyway, I barely knew them, but I sent this email and said, oh, I'm thinking of, you know, forming this support group. And I don't think I would have had the guts to do it on any other day except a Friday afternoon. Really hoping but not expecting I'd hear back. And I think it speaks to the experience that everybody's having. Although I was an international student and they were Norwegian, I think, you know, they also are experiencing their own form of isolation because they all write straight back. And so we formed our own little support group that would get together. And sometimes we talk about academic PhD things. They were doing PhDs in my field, psychology, but completely different sorts of topics. So sometimes we talk about that, but sometimes there was a social support group. We'd have food and we'd share each other's lives, and that was really important. I also made efforts to listen to how I was feeling on a particular day. So if I was on my way to walk or take public transport to university, and if I just felt like, I'm just not quite fully there, or I need to maybe stop off and allow myself to have a nice cup of coffee and a piece of cake on the way, or I need to go and do some exercise, I would listen to that part, where in the past I would have pushed through and thought that that was a sign of weakness. And the other thing I did, which I found really valuable, was I started to get to know some people who had absolutely nothing to do with academia whatsoever. So through some contacts, I met some people who were into science fiction, which I am too. So we would meet up once a week and we would watch a science fiction show together and share a meal, like tacos or pizza or something. And that was incredibly important. I used to really look forward to that once a week meetup because they were people who could not care less about whether I did a PhD or not. We were together and sharing time that had nothing to do with academia. So that was really important. Way of looking after my mental health, and also just being willing to generally reach out, you know, so to have, and that might be whether that was formal kind of health professionals or to other people in my broader social networking, social network. And the consequence, I did finish that PhD. So I finished that PhD, and yet in lots of ways that experience was even harder, more difficult, more challenging to my mental well-being than that first experience of doing a PhD. But for me, the clear difference that I can see, which is why I'm so passionate about this topic, is that I took my mental well-being seriously and I took steps to actively take care of that and nourish it and respect it, really. And that, honestly, was what made the difference between me, yes, finishing that PhD versus not being able to finish the other one. So that's a little my background in terms of why I find this topic really, really important, quite apart from the fact that I happen to wear a hat as a psychologist who works in academia and supervises HTR students. So anyway, that's my very long-winded explanation that sometimes people kind of, feel a bit helpful, I guess, in terms of reflecting on their own experience. So we've been joined by a couple of other people in that time. Do any of those people who've newly joined us have any questions or comments that they'd like to make? Questions of me, or questions or comments about the course or the modules or how they're moving through it? Hi, Jessica, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
So in this week, week 3, we were talking about the context, I guess, the environment. So it's not always just about you, I guess, is the message there, that there are also environmental forces or factors that play a big part in your experience of being an early career researcher. And again, it's important to pay attention to those. Sometimes you can make changes, sometimes you can't, but just being aware of the influence that they had can be illuminating. Next week, we're moving into recognising maybe within yourself when your mental well-being is not doing so great, and putting in place some strategies, excuse me, some simple strategies that you might be able to put in place yourself to try and take care of mental well-being, or that you might be able to use in a preventative sort of way. So, yeah, putting in place now, even if you are doing okay, floating okay, to kind of, yeah, hopefully protect against those times when mental wellbeing is more under threat. So that's what we do in week 4. So we're moving more towards the pointy end. And in week 5, the final week of this course, we look at those situations which sometimes happen, which happened in my case, where I think I need more help than I can provide to myself at this point in time. So it gives some ideas about where you might be able to get support that's beyond yourself for those times when you feel like that might be needed, or how you might be able to help support other people in terms of other people you might find struggling and where you might be able to guide them. We'll also encourage you to have a think about how you're going to think about your mental well-being and your mental health, I guess, going forward, whether or not you stay in academia. So whether you ever see inside the halls of a university ever again, whatever you do in life, I think there are things that are, helpful to think about going forward in terms of taking care of yourself, I guess. Yeah. Because, yeah, we know all the research shows that mental well-being, social connection, these are the things that make a difference to the quality of life that people have long term, despite what academia can tell you about what's important in terms of achievement and publications and moving up the ladder. Those are important for, succeeding in your career, but when people look back on their lives, and hopefully some of you may have had a chance to look at those talks and that information about the Harvard study, the long-term Harvard study. When people look back over their lives, the things that almost always make the difference are, relationships and self-care. What kind of life they reflect on. I probably don't have much else to say at this point. Ola, did you have any questions for me, things that I've missed? Or
I haven't seen in your module in the content, and I'm just checking now if anyone posted slides. Yeah, no, here as well. Yeah, we can wrap up if you wish for this week, and it would be nice to share it with all students.
Yeah. Sorry, we shared the video with all students. Is that what you're saying? Or
you can wrap up the week, and we'll be able
yes. Well, I haven't had a look to see. I mean, I've been into the discussion boards and posted some stuff in there, some responses. I haven't had a look at the poll results. Have you got those there to have a look at and see what the results of the poll was? That's usually
look.
I'm pretty passionate about thinking about the systemic or the environmental context. So although I'm a clinical psychologist, I'm also very much a developmental psychologist. So developmental psychology is looking at how people grow and change, I suppose, and then all the different influences on that. And for me, thinking about what we've talked about this week in terms of the environmental influences, the systems that we operate in is incredibly important. And in my field, psychology, we have been very guilty in the past of focusing too much on the individual in terms of making them responsible solely for what happens to them. And not only do I think that's unfair, I think it's absolutely inaccurate. So I'm hoping from this week that people have had a sense of being able to lift their eyes and see what's going on around them. I suppose that's important to consider, and that there may be ways that you can have influence on those systems and environments to help yourself and to help others. And as I said earlier, though, there may be ways in which you can't, but at least having an awareness of them can help give clarity to what you're experiencing, right? And sometimes it feels like it's all about you. I know it can be helpful to know that there are bigger forces at play. Even simple things like, the way that, labs or HDR rooms are organised, right? Or the way in my day, you had to go into university, so there was always a space where people were mingling and had an opportunity to socialise, whereas that's not so much the case anymore, which a lot of work gets done at home. So that makes it more difficult to make those connections that are important. The fact that there are policies that come down from the university that all and I are subject to, and you also, as early career researchers, are subject to, that you might not be aware of and you might never want to be aware of. But it can be helpful if you can just, find out a little bit about those, so you have an idea around, why things are structured the way they are, particularly when things don't make sense or they seem unfair. Anyway, so I think that kind of systemic focus is important. Yeah.
Poll in our chat for everyone.
Oh, sorry. The poll, let's see.
But the answers are
They're
quite
all pretty much parring, the same, aren't they? Not the same, but similar responses. So in terms of what were people looking for most in a supervisor, we're pretty evenly split there. A little bit of somebody who's skilled at keeping researchers on track and achieving timely completion. So that kind of idea of the supervisor as coach. But otherwise, someone who's skilled at providing emotional support is important, successful at getting their work and that of their students published as well. Yeah. It's, as somebody who also has a supervisor hat on, it's tricky performing all those functions, and I think rightly so. There's a bit more demanded of supervisors than there possibly has been in the past, but there is a little bit of alchemy, a little bit of magic involved, and a bit of pragmatism, I suppose, in terms of finding a supervisor. So my advice would be, if you have a supervisor who's strong in one particular area, maybe look at how you can form a supervisory team where other people on that team might have strengths in the other areas that are important to you, so you have some balance. And also, I think it can be easy because of the power difference in the supervisory team, but your supervisors, it really is in their best interest for you to do well, right? It's in their best interest, but it's also, most of them absolutely have the welfare of their students at heart. And sometimes we supervisors can get on a bit of a one track. So in academia, you're often having to do a lot of different roles. They might be having to teach, they're having to do their own research, they're having to attend 1,000 meetings, they're having to keep a lot of things in their head. So it can feel like they approach supervision in a very task-oriented way, maybe comes across as a bit driven and cold, and it might feel like it's hard to ask your supervisor for support or to say, actually, I'm struggling here, or whatever. But supervisors do have your best interest at heart. It's in their interest for you to do well. So I would encourage you always to try and approach your supervisors first, and to do that earlier rather than later. It's really hard as a supervisor to make changes or to build in supports at the last minute. Like, for example, if you're coming up to a major milestone and you haven't been able to get that document done, or you're really struggling, it's really hard, 2 weeks out, to be able to turn things around. But if you can, keep communicating with them and let them know how you're going. If you're not getting that sort of support, like if you're not getting the supervision you need, it's absolutely your right to ask for that, because supervisors get something out of supervising as well, right? So don't be afraid to ask for the support that you need, or to at least problem solve creatively within your supervisory team around how to get you the support that you need. It feels like a very top-down relationship, and I guess I just encourage you, through what we were talking about this week, to see that you have possibly more importance and definitely more influence than you can sometimes feel in the situation. I'm sitting here in Brisbane, Australia, I presume Ola is, and it is tipping down with rain. But yes. So there's a little loud sound of rain outside where I am at the moment. Not at all sunny Queensland.
Thank you very much, Ariana, for your time and everyone who joined us.
Thank you, everybody who joined online today, and those of you who are listening. After this, appreciate it. I love taking this course. As I said, feel free to contact me at any time if you have questions. And yeah, I look forward to connecting you in the last 2 weeks.
And Ariana is also the author of the course, so it's her like a baby. So
Yeah.
if you have ideas, if you think that there are some areas which could support you and other research students, just reach out to Ariana.
Yeah, absolutely. Or any questions or comments also about how the course could be made more relevant for your situation, or for, it's although I've done it twice, it's a very long time now since I was an HTR student. So and the world has changed a lot even in those 13 years or so. So yeah, please do let me know if there are things that you feel could be improved as well. Great work. Good luck wherever you go from this point. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Masood. Thanks, Nishrat. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ola, as always, for being
Thank
here.
you so much.
Bye for now.